Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and returning to the show from SumerSports, senior NFL analyst Sam Bruchhaus. It is an exciting time, Sam. I was just watching you and Lindsey Rhodes go back and forth on a fantasy style draft that you guys were doing because we're all just waiting for something to happen here. So we're going to have some fun. And that's what we're going to do on the show today. So how are you?
I'm doing excellent. This draft season has been one of the more exciting ones just based off of what's going to happen, because I don't really have a good idea of what's going to happen. And last year, it felt pretty confident that we were going to see 3 or more quarterbacks drafted. We were going to see a ton of wide receivers and tackles drafted up at the top of the draft. And this year feels like a lot of question marks.
Pretty much every year there's some sort of twist. Last year it was the Michael Penix, and this year the late discussions about Shedeur Sanders, and then people are trying to make other quarterbacks happen. Todd McShay moves Jalen Milroe into the first round of a mock draft, and then everyone says, well, wait a minute, am I missing something on Jalen Milroe? So maybe there's an attempt to get some intrigue with the quarterback, but I think the fact that there isn't a lot of quarterbacks to talk about here for a team like the Vikings at 24 has made the discussion even more fascinating, because we're focused so much on not only just team needs, but who teams are going to think are the best players. And there could be lots of different boards for lots of different teams, depending on how they view different guys. And so before we get into our fun discussion I'm going to have that includes some Vikings fans here sending things in, I want to ask you a little bit about the SumerSports Draft Guide, which introduces a whole heck of a lot of new data that has never been seen before in the draft. And, you and I both love a lot of the data products that are out there. We use PFF and things like that all the time, but Sumer offering something very new to the analytics market, which of course has got me excited. So I was just poking around. I want to ask you about a couple of players that the Vikings, I think, could have potentially targeted. The safety position is one where they have maybe the clearest need, because Harrison Smith may be going into his last year. We're not sure exactly of their confidence in Theo Jackson, and they like to rotate players. What has been your view of Starks and Emenware? And is this a draft where you could wait until the 3rd round to pick a guy, or is it kind of a 2 safety type of draft?
This definitely feels like a 2 safety kind of draft in terms of the consensus, the projection, and not making a reach. It feels like the options are Starks and Emenware if you want guys who you can at least think that you're going to plug in pretty immediately. They're 2 interesting different prospects. Starks is immensely versatile. He does a lot of different things, and I know that's probably tasty for Brian Flores and the way he runs his defense. He's pressed a lot. He doesn't necessarily miss a lot of tackles. He's excellent in the run game. I think all of that is really interesting, but I do have questions about his coverage background. And then you look at Emenware, and it's less of a what he did on the field guy, and it's a more of this guy could be a perfect safety prospect. We're talking about elite athleticism, excellent size. But then the questions come about is, what all can he do? He's a straight line runner. He had issues with, being able to get really in there and make a ton of plays sideline to sideline. He's more of a straight line speed guy. But at the same time, there's immense potential there. And so I think what the draft guide does a really good job of outlining is, how versatile are these guys? Where are they being utilized? How good are they against the run? Are they missing a lot of tackles? We have badges which are based on our Sumer scores that we show teams that outline what the AI even thinks about these guys. And I think the AI kind of meets the eye in these are 2 very different prospects, but they're probably separated from the other safeties.
Yeah, the Emenware thing, I think, reminds people maybe of an Isaiah Simmons, and you always go to the player that's a bust first. Even when the Vikings were drafting quarterbacks, is he going to be the next Christian Ponder? Like, we always kind of do that. But there is a profile of NFL draft prospects throughout the years of a guy that has some shortcomings and then goes to Indianapolis and takes his draft stock and moves it up. And I was just watching the 03 draft the other day, and the guy that the Jets traded 2 firsts to move up to the top 5 to get, They're like, well, he's not that productive, but he's got this great combine in Indianapolis. So this has been happening for over 20 years. I guess what I don't know is whether Eminwari is one of those guys or if he is just a freak who can be awesome at football. And if we're nitpicking some of his different skill or movement skill, just because that has happened so many times throughout the history of the draft.
It's an excellent point. And we did research last year that indicates that these combine risers, of which Eminwari is one, typically underperform where they're actually drafted, and they typically perform more to the rate or to the average of where you expected him to do. So now that he's kind of jumped all the way up into the middle late first round as compared to where he was at the end of the season is of interest. What I will note is our artificial intelligence Sumer scores did have him as a very productive player, particularly in coverage, which is, not always the case with these big kind of guys. And so with that in mind, he wasn't elite. He was good. And I typically like to see guys in the top 25 in terms of man coverage. He was there, but in terms of being all around, he was a little bit more around like 60 ranked among safeties. And so it's an interesting prospect profile. I do think he's probably a little overvalued right now, but that's not to say that he can't cash in on his potential. All I'm trying to say is the probability of him being an all pro level guy, which is kind of where you want those guys to be when you're drafting a safety, a non premium position in the first round, is probably less than it would indicate as based on his big board position right now.
So it's so tricky about the safety position is that it's often a product of what else is happening with your defense, the system that you play, the positions that you're put in, even by the cornerbacks that you play with, the linebackers that you play with, because we're not often seeing somebody just manned up with a wide receiver. That's something defenses are trying to avoid. And the NFL is so much different than college with the assignments for the safeties. Things happen so much faster in front of them. There are so many more things to identify, the movement at the line of scrimmage and the different options receivers have based on what they're doing. And this is why Malachi Starks, to me, stands out, is that everything that's talked about with him, his versatility, and I can pull this up on the SumerSports draft guide, 91st percentile for his position in terms of versatility. So he played nickel corner, he played in the box, he played deep. I think that it's an IQ position, but if you can add elite physical traits, you get Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith, with his mental ability, if he had half the athleticism, he would have still been a really good player at this position because I think it's so much to do with smarts. But if you want a game changer, not a Cam Bynum, who's a really good player, but more like wow, this guy's going to be there for 10 years, an Eric Weddle or an Eric Berry or somebody who's really special, you probably do have to draft them pretty high. And I guess I wonder what you think of Starks through that lens and with some of those comparisons.
So he's a guy, and I think you nailed it because our AI obviously can't go into the mind of some of these guys, but our scouts can get a pretty good idea of what is supposed to be happening at any given point in time on the field or what they should be thinking. And our scouts absolutely love this dude. And I think you excellently highlighted that about this player. And that's why he is the top safety in this draft by the consensus. The element I do want to add in is you mentioned it. Not only do safeties, they're hard to evaluate because it is a very mental position, which leads to why it not being a premium position, but also in a year over year basis, things can change. Coaching positions can change. I don't think that's going to be the case unless Brian Flores gets a head coaching position. But it's difficult to predict year to year if a safety can be a real impact player. And so I think that's why it's a little safer, maybe not in this draft in particular, and particularly as you're getting to the back half of the first round where the Vikings currently sit. But you want to stay away from those premium positions for a couple of reasons. Number one, hard to predict. Number two, not going to get a ton of surplus value. And lastly, that fifth year option may not be of super duper interest when you can extend a guy and be maybe under that what the fifth year option would end up being just based on where the market is at any given point in time. And so for those three reasons, you might want to take a look at a more premium position. But I think given the way the Vikings approached free agency, they're in a position where they can maybe attack a need like safety, particularly if an excellent guy, one of the top safeties in this draft is available, like Starks or Warren.
So I go back and forth on this all the time with the quote non-premium positions, because if you were talking about drafting in the top 10, I would say to the Vikings, hey, look, there's safeties available all the time. Why don't you go get edge rusher, corner, whatever it might be, one of those premium positions that they need. And they're not picking there, though. I guess defensive tackle, if it was Mason Graham or something, like get that guy instead that we're seeing more impact from. But at the back end of the first, you're talking about getting the best player in the entire draft at that position. And when we talk about free agency, okay, yes, there is a Cam Bynum that's available and some very good safeties. Maybe Javon Holland is this guy, but there's not often game changing safeties. Their teams draft them and they keep them. And I was proud of myself trying to reach into the past and grabbing Weddle as a second round pick and Eric Berry as a top pick, because those are the type of guys that go to Pro Bowls and make all pros. And usually it requires an extra level of physical skill and game changing instinct. So I'm always back and forth, which I want to ask you about another position that's, I think, easy to debate this same way, which is the guard position, where normally you just don't draft guards in the first round. There are whole first rounds where we see one or something. Maybe somebody who's a tackle eventually moves to guard. But in this draft, there's a few guys that are really intriguing. The thing about Tyler Booker is everything I hear on Tyler Booker, people are like, this guy's awesome. He's an awesome guy. He's massive. He's a people mover. Like, you want this guy. But then when you start to get like us into some analytics on him, it's a little harder to convince me because his run blocking PFF grade isn't great. Some of the data that you guys have, you have it color coded. So it's like red and green and blue. It's very, very pretty. There's a lot of orange that's okay. There's some red. There's not a lot of things that are eye popping. And then you add in the combine, also not eye popping. How do you weigh him versus an NDSU guy where your data is fantastic, but he also played at NDSU in Gray Zabel? How are you dealing with that problem?
So I think there's a couple bits and pieces. You do highlight a really interesting thing, though. It's that the eye isn't meeting the AI in terms of Tyler Booker, which is where I really like to dig in on certain things, where people have him as like a mauler and all this stuff, and some of his stats aren't great. Our AI likes what he's doing. The running game wasn't quite what it was at Alabama last year with a lot of the same people in there. The scouts say his football temperament is excellent. There's a lot of converging and diverging elements here, including, like you mentioned, his athletic scores, which just were not up to par with what you want to see with the next level offensive lineman. Now, how much does that matter? Matters a little bit more for the bigger guys, but guard position, got to have a great mentality. That's something my boss, Thomas Dimentroff, has always highlighted. But there are those questions. And when you're trying to stack bust, which is what all these teams are trying to do, those things have to come up. I mean, they are elements that are different. With regards to Gray Zabel, less information and less stability of information. When you're playing at that FCS level, it's just difficult to note what is going to transform. Obviously, when it comes to North Dakota State in particular, they've sent a lot of successful guys to the NFL. But at the same time, the level of competition is not the same. What I will note, however, though, is pretty much everyone has Booker slotted in as a guard, which he played at the next level, especially given the face of last year where the Vikings kind of hit a tailspin after both of their tackles went out. The idea that perhaps Gray Zabel could swing out to the tackle position that he played in college may provide extra value. And we have a data scientist on our team named Quinn McLean who has looked into these swing offensive linemen and how they've increased in nature in the last few years and how teams are starting to seek them out. And this is a really great draft for swing offensive linemen. And so I think if the Vikings are evaluating a guy where there's a lot of blue, but then there's a lot of orange, there's a lot of question marks, as you said, but then a player who maybe can swing out to tackle should things go wrong or down the line, but also fill in and be 90% of the guard that Booker might be. That's definitely something to consider in the first round and probably subsequent rounds as well.
Well, I was thinking about an Elgton Jenkins for something like that we've seen for the Packers play all sorts of different positions, and I think he's going to play center next year. And that's what I was thinking about Gray Zabel. That's so interesting to me is you could draft him as a left guard, and you could even develop him for a time because they have a left guard there who was serviceable last year. So if you don't want to play him week one, you don't have to, and he's depth right away. But then long term, Ryan Kelly is on essentially a year to year type of contract. And Kelly is a phenomenal leader. He has a tremendous history in the NFL, but he also has the injuries, and we don't know how much longer he's going to play in the NFL. So you could have an option there and being able to move him around. And you're right, when they had an injury, they had to go out and trade for someone, and Robinson did his best, but was not anywhere near assimilated enough to play at an above average level. It's so complicated on the offensive line. I think that's an interesting point. As far as just one other position I want to ask you about, the cornerback position. I'm putting this theory out there, and I like it because I think recent history is on my side. I think that draft analysts overvalue some of the top corners for where they're actually going to be picked, not their value if they become great. But when I look at mock draft consensus boards versus where corners were picked, there's a lot of notable examples recently. Joey Porter Jr. dropping out of the first round. A lot of people had him in the top 15. Quinyon Mitchell last year, he was a top 15 player. Terrion Arnold was in that ballpark. Those guys didn't get drafted that high. Cooper DeJean, I believe, was 22nd on consensus boards. He goes into the second round. Howie Roseman says he's the best second round pick of all time, which I don't think that's true. But hey, if you win the Super Bowl, you could say crazy stuff, and everyone has to go like, yeah, all right, fine, I guess so. But what do you make of the chances of a Jahdae Barron or a Will Johnson dropping? And do you think those guys are worth high first round draft picks?
You mentioned at the top of the pod that me and my co-host Lindsay Rhodes were doing a fantasy style drop. This was one of my major takeaways that I could definitely see a lot of these guys dropping, almost similar to kind of the second tier of wide receiver last year, where someone trades up for Xavier Worthy, but then all of a sudden it feels like Keon Coleman is available in the second round. It seems like all these other wide receivers are available in the second round. I do wonder if Will Johnson will also end up dropping. It feels like there's not a great spot for him when I do mock drafts. A lot of teams need a corner, but how do they view Will Johnson? I don't really necessarily know. The Saints were a place that I thought Brandon Staley, the new defensive coordinator, would have loved a cornerback, but now it seems like they're in the quarterback market. So I do agree with what you're saying, and it's also been a major takeaway from my analysis thus far is that number one, it feels like there's not a huge difference between Jahdae Barron, between Benjamin Morrison, Savon Ravel. All of them have pretty big question marks. In terms of Barron, it's like, can he be a day-to-day outside cornerback? With the other ones, it's injuries. And Will Johnson as well. So I definitely agree. I wouldn't be shocked if these guys start getting pushed back. And moreover, I wouldn't be surprised if certain teams start trading back into the second round, knowing that at least one of these guys, who are probably all clustered together, will be available.
I think that's a great point. And if you're the Vikings, you think about, okay, maybe you like three of these guys, and at 24, they're still available. Well, unless there's going to be a run, which these teams have good information on who's taking who, then you can potentially trade back. Why don't we, before we move on to my fun part of the show, why don't we just end with that? Trading back is a really fun discussion to have, I think, because a lot of the studies that have been done through the years will find that trading back is a good idea. The Vikings had possibly the worst trade back ever in 2022, moving back and getting Andrew Booth Jr., Ed Ingram, and Lewis Seen, none of which have worked out or even remotely worked out. But the numbers will tell you that stacking those picks gives you a better opportunity to have more bites at the apple, more chances to get a good player. Yet drafting higher yields better players. That's why I love the discussion, because I could see Kwesi Adofo-Mensah looking at it either way. Like, we actually need a great player to try to get here, as opposed to numbers, because the roster is pretty well filled out. Or they could say, in a draft like this, where there could be a lot of corners, or there could be multiple offensive linemen they like, maybe they move down. Where do you kind of stand on all that?
I totally agree. And I think when you look at the tippy top of the draft, this becomes an even starker relief, particularly when it comes to the quarterback position, sometimes the edge position, and the tackle position. I do think once you start getting back into the mid 20s, the the thesis of all the research is that there's not a big difference between pick 24 and pick, 38, for example. And historically, and I think that's why you've seen teams like the Eagles, like the Patriots back in the day, do this over and over again. It seems to always work. You mentioned it didn't turn out very well for the Vikings, but all that to be said, especially in a draft like this one, where there are these clusters of players and there's not guys where maybe the edge position, which I don't really think is a position of need at all for the Vikings, might be like this. But it doesn't feel like there's going to be I can't get a cornerback in 10 to 20 picks, if that makes sense, for example. And I think that's why, particularly with a team like the Vikings, perhaps the Bills as well, who did it last year, and a couple other of these teams, trading back in this particular draft is so looked upon favorably. And I also want to note, it does feel like a plan from the Vikings in that last year overachieved, invested in the quarterback, didn't necessarily get to play him year one, won a lot of games, didn't have a lot of draft picks in this draft, which is viewed as kind of a lesser draft with the bulk of the guys being at the edge rusher position, which they've already addressed, and the interior offensive line and defensive line, where I think they're going to be able to grab guys, really heavily investing in a free agency class that had those guys available, and now being able to trade back and rebuild their draft capital down the line. That feels like the third part of the plan to me, perhaps. And I'm wondering if that just doesn't end up kind of going down the yellow brick road per se, along with that plan. I don't know if it's the big three, but it feels like that's what it's lining up to do.
It makes so much sense to trade down in a position like this when you have so few draft picks, just even starting there. But also, it's not like they have a million 2026 draft picks or anything else like that. So you could start kind of the process. They are going to get some of those coveted comp picks finally, but a couple, maybe a fourth and a third for Sam Darnold will be nice for them. But I'm sure that even trading back, if you could get something for next year, which teams always seem to be much more willing to part ways with,
Mhm.
well, they want this leadership in charge for a while. This is not a situation where you go, oh my gosh, you have to draft the franchise saving player today or you're all fired. When you get into that spot, it's pretty tough and you
Precisely.
can't really do it, but they're not in that spot. So here's what I threw out there to my subscribers to the newsletter. I tossed out there on Substack, if you want to go find that, purpleinsider.substack. I wanted to ask about crazy statements that you think or that you believe or that you're not 100% sure about. And so I took a handful of them and brought them to the show. I'm going to do a whole article answering all of them, another podcast as well. But I thought some would be good to apply to our conversation. So I've got a few questions here from Vikings fans that start off with, am I crazy to think blank? So let's begin with this from Jeff. Says, am I crazy to think that the Vikings will do something kind of shocking in this year's draft? Something that none of us saw coming. Is Jeff crazy, or do you think that we've kind of covered all the potential Viking scenarios?
Jeff, you may be a little bit crazy. The only thing that I would be shocked about them doing is if they grabbed a quarterback in round one. Everything
So
else
nothing
seems like,
else would shock you other than that?
well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like it seems lined up for them to go by the book and by the consensus. They want to trade back if they want to get a cornerback at a good spot. They want to get, an interior defensive lineman at a good spot. Even if they want to go ahead and invest in the edge rushing position, which they have three of, there'll be people available. I think the only thing that would be borderline shocking is a tackle, maybe in like trading up for a tackle, which I don't even think is in the cards. So, Jeff might be a little bit crazy, but I'm interested to see what scenarios in particular Jeff is thinking about.
So the only things that I could think of that would fall under, well, we didn't really see that coming, is if they went edge rusher because they spent so much on Dallas Turner, and they've also talked about how they're very confident in Dallas Turner. I think they should be still. He was playing behind two tremendous players last year and then another proven role player in a season where they're winning 14 games, not trying to develop, but just trying to win. And edge rushers don't traditionally produce as much early on. So if they were to go out and get an edge rusher, we'd be like, wait a minute, are they not feeling like what they said about Dallas Turner, or are they trying to create some freaky rotation, or like what's going on here? Loveland, the tight end, or Warren, the tight end, that would be very shocking because they have TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver. It might actually just be borderline ridiculous. So there's a shocker. I think any situation where they moved up would
Mm,
be completely shocking because they have no draft capital to
yep.
do it. So they would have to reach into next year. If they reached into next year and said, no, we're getting, I don't even know. Maybe some teams think Will Campbell's arms are too short and he drops to 12 and they're like, we're moving up. We're going to get him. That I would say would really take us by surprise.
Yeah. I just don't view any of that as high probability per se. So
Well, it's got to surprise you.
it would
So if it
surprise me.
surprises you, then it's not high probability.
It's a great point. But I just don't feel like the Vikings would do any of that. And I would be shocked if it did. So then
Mhm.
I would be the crazy one, I suppose.
I think that Jeff is a little crazy. Look, it's the draft. We never know what's going to happen. I just wrote today about that '03 draft where the Vikings didn't turn in their pick and they dropped two spots in the draft. And let me tell you, if you watch the broadcast back, they were pretty shocked. So you never know. A guy had a gas mask bong one time, like things happen on draft night. So you're only a little crazy to me. You never know. Next one comes from Purple Words Man. And he says, am I crazy to say that Ivan Pace is the weakest player on the Vikings defense and that drafting a top tier linebacker is possible?
That's an interesting one.
Is Purple Words Man crazy?
Purple words, man. I'm biased towards Ivan Pace. I'm going to be honest.
Mm. You
I
are a
love
former
guys.
linebacker.
I'm a former linebacker and I'm a former American Conference linebacker. So
Mm.
with that in mind, I want to say you're a little bit crazy. But here's what I really want to say. The way that the Vikings play, he is designed to be more of the hammerhead. He's the run defender of the group. And he's very good at being a run defender. Top 5 in terms of our run defense linebacking Sumer scores last year. And so if that's going to be his role, I would be a little bit shocked if they go for a top tier linebacker. That being said, it feels like the two linebackers that people like this year, they like because they have weird versatility, edge rushing capabilities. And so I don't actually think you're super crazy that they may be taking a close eye at a Jihad Campbell or a Jalen Walker if they fall. I just wonder if it's to take Ivan Pace's place per se.
Yeah, and it doesn't really work that way with Flores' defense. It's just a bunch of really talented dudes who do everything. I saw Theo Jackson was on Good Morning Football, and he was saying that Brian Flores really treats us all like X's on the chalkboard. And I think that's a really good way to describe it because you can line up in any place, anytime, almost no matter what position you are, outside of, they're not going to move Jonathan Grenard to deep safety. But when it comes to the linebackers and the safeties and even the corners, they are mixing and matching all the time. And when I look at the profile of a Jihad Campbell, I see a guy that did that same stuff and Jalen Walker that did that same stuff to where on one down he could be edge rushing, another one he's playing inside and he's comfortable with both. And Andrew Van Ginkel, if you're looking a year down the road until he has a contract extension, he is going into the last year of his contract here. I think that's the one that would be surprising, but not insane for them to do if that's the best player on the board. And like you said, not necessarily to get rid of Ivan Pace, but just to have more mixing and matching options. And one more point on this. I also think that there's 17 games and you play a lot of football throughout a
Mhm.
year. And it's great if you can have a guy play 750 snaps instead of 1,100.
100%. And just digging in the question a little bit more, I still don't think the linebacking core altogether is like the weakness of this team at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
If we were thinking of the weakness of this team, I still think it's probably the defensive backfield group.
Yep.
And so I think everything you said makes a lot of sense in that it's another X on the chalkboard. It's another weapon that can be deployed and continue to cause issues for offensive linemen and quarterbacks. I just don't know if the Ivan Pace part of it is necessarily true.
I think you're justified in your defensiveness over Ivan Pace, even though it is filled with bias because he's been really good for them. But there are some limitations to a
Yep.
linebacker that is not very tall. And I think coverage is where it got
Mhm.
exposed last year. Blake Cashman, one of the elite cover linebackers. If you had Pace as a rotational guy, I mean, this is where we are talking about high level top 5 defense theory here. Because even when you say the secondary is their weakness, I don't disagree, but it's like, also still pretty good. And
Yeah.
so we're talking about could they add some freaky weapon to go along with the defense that's already stacked? The next one comes from Christopher. He says, "Am I crazy to think that the Vikings still need to draft a rookie running back to learn under Aaron Jones, someone like Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, I think, who is big, runs with power. Some of the other backs coming out in the draft, I've watched their tape. We got a tape grinder here in Christopher. I don't see them running over anybody. Caleb Johnson, for example. I don't know. Caleb Johnson can run over some people. I think he's pretty big. But the main am I crazy is that the Vikings should draft a running back.
Christopher, I don't think you're crazy at all, but it has very little to do with the Vikings. It has to do with how deep this running back class is. I made a big mistake. I made maybe I'll do it again just because it was funny, but I went live on Twitter and I did live mock drafts to prepare for this media blitz that we're doing for the draft guide that you can find on SumerSports.com. In the third round, I was picking for the Jets, and Cam Skattebo was available, and I was like, "Great, this is awesome." Brees Hall, may he not get an extension? Let's go with Cam Skattebo and add another piece to this Jets team. And then it came to the 5th and 6th rounds, and there were still good running backs available. And that's why I think you're not crazy at all, Christopher, is because if you can add a guy in the 5th round that you feel can contribute in the first 2 years, especially if he can contribute on special teams as well, it makes a ton of sense to draft a running back. The only item that I would highlight is there's very limited draft capital as it sits for the Vikings. But that being said, if they take the approach that I think they may take, which is trade back out of the first round, maybe add a fifth this year or a fourth or a later pick, they may have more picks and they may end up going running back just because of the quality of these guys, 10 through 15, 15 through 20.
Well, and it is, I think, the truth that Aaron Jones is here for a year or two. And Jordan Mason is a guy and he runs violently, and everybody likes Jordan Mason. But the upside is he just a duo back, which is not a diss. That's good to have in today's NFL. But would you like to have somebody now? You want Gordon because he's bigger and he's fast as well. But even if you had someone who is smaller, quicker, like an RJ Harvey, who I think is fantastic. You're right about this. We start talking about the
There's
running backs.
so
I'm
many
like,
names.
this guy. If you just sort by averaged 6 yards a carry, you find a bunch of guys. The Tootin dude who runs a 4.32, he'd be great to pick up on Madden and have him be your starter. There's so many options here. And I also wonder too, just a little bit, if the kick return with all of a sudden the NFL saying, guys, you're going to actually have to return it or give the ball up at the 35, that may increase the value of some of these players too. If you have somebody who runs a 4.32 and you want to throw him in there. So I don't think that you are crazy at all. But I do like Caleb Johnson a lot from Iowa. I just think, Jarquez Hunter is another one who's got great numbers from Auburn. I mean, there's just all guys everywhere. So I don't disagree. And I think when you get into the 5th round, because we could talk about, well, they need a little depth here, a little depth there, but it's the 5th round. Like, just take a player who could be good for you at some point, and I would go running back for sure. All right, couple more real quick here. How about this from Bob? He says, "Am I crazy?" And Bob might be crazy with this one. JJ McCarthy, or am I crazy to say JJ McCarthy might have a better rookie year than Jaden Daniels?
Bob, probability wise, you're crazy.
Yeah.
I think Jaden Daniels might have had the best rookie season of all time, depending on what metric you look at. Like, very rarely is a quarterback the rookie of the year, kind of in MVP discussions, Pro Bowler, in all pro discussions, and he makes it to the NFC Championship game. Like, that's a lot to ask for. But it's certainly a lot easier when you have two good tackles in Justin Jefferson. So that's where I'll put it. Probability wise, I'm going to go with a hard no on this one. He will not have as good of a year as Jaden Daniels, typically the average, which I think we talked about a long time ago when we were discussing JJ McCarthy, is more like, Aiden O'Connell. It's like pretty rough out there for these rookie quarterbacks. I think the position is great for JJ McCarthy. I think regardless of how he plays, they're going to figure it out with a great coach like KOC. But I got to say, you're a little bit crazy, Bob. I don't think he's getting up to the heights of Jaden Daniels.
All right. Well, let me try anyway. Let me just try anyway. Because, you just told Bob that he's crazy. So let me try to tell Bob he's not crazy. Number one is that rookie was in finger quotes because he's not actually a rookie. And I know that it'll be talked about that way. Well, he didn't play last year. This is really his rookie year, but it's not because he's had an entire training camp. He's had preseason action. He has been behind the scenes working with Sam Darnold, watching how an NFL season plays out, game planning with KOC, training with him, understanding his offense. There is nothing to learn about the offense for JJ McCarthy because he knows it already as he shows up for this offseason program. He is also, for a first year starting quarterback, probably being given the best circumstance. I don't want to say of all time because I'd have to think maybe Kurt Warner probably was a little better with Torrey Holt, Marshall Faulk. I don't know if the Vikings have Marshall Faulk. Orlando Pace. Yeah, that was pretty good. But aside from that, you probably can't come up with 10 other historical positions where a quarterback started for his very first year in the NFL and had the best receiver in the NFL, two of the top tackles, an interior that's been had a lot of money poured into it, coach of the year. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. It's very Brock Purdy ish, or even 2022 Jalen Hurts ish. And I think that there's a chance that he's just as good. I mean, Daniels was incredible, of course. And I'm not saying NFC Championship is a guarantee in his first year, but could he lead a team to the top of the division with all of that? Yeah, I think that's not crazy.
That was going to be the one as you were walking through it that I was going to call out is some of these Eagles teams that just pop guys in and all of a sudden they had a great first year. That would be the high expectation with what's happened because you have two borderline Pro Bowl level tackles. You have a deep pass catching coffer, 4 deep probably solves the 3 wide receiver problem certainly. You have a lot of investment at the running back position and at the interior offensive line. The keys to the Lamborghini are there. Now you just got to stick them in the ignition.
All right, this one comes from Matthew C at purpleinsider.com. Am I crazy, the host of the show, Sam, am I crazy for wanting the Vikings to take a wide receiver if they are there on the board 24 that's a game changer? Am I crazy or not?
No, you are not crazy, Matthew. See, I'm so glad someone has said this. And the names that come up are interesting. This was another major takeaway from our podcast, which you can find wherever you listen to podcasts, was that like there's real juice to Emeka Egbuka in particular and to Luther Burden. I'm a little like weirded out of like Matthew Golden is really high. There's not a ton of great arguments for why he's that high per se. He's under 1,000 yards. He does have a lot of blue grades and some excellent stuff like that. But it seems like the two that would really fit into this offense are Luther Burden and Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka, power slot, has played, understands his role, can block, played alongside excellent wide receivers, would be an excellent complement in KOC's offense to Justin Jefferson. It feels like an excellent fit. Secondarily, Luther Burden. This was a guy we were talking about being like maybe a top 5-10 pick last year. Like we were talking about him being in the realm of the Neighbors and the BTJs and the Marvin Harrison Juniors last year and had just a year kind of independent of him that was awful. Brady Cook from Missouri, massive downturn. The offensive play calling, massive downturn. I think there's a ton of value with Luther Burden. I think they're going to be available in that range. And I think given all the contract situations and the way things are progressing with this offense, it makes a ton of sense to draft a wide receiver at that spot in the draft.
The way I look at it is it's very simple. It's receivers are impossible to get in free agency. They are unbelievably expensive. So the surplus value is enormous. And anything that helps number 9 be a better version of himself I'm into it. It's to me, I throw needs. Oh, you need a guard, you need a whatever. Wait a minute. What is going to make the quarterback the best version of himself. And what have we seen historically? Zahir Hakim was a great wide receiver 3 for those teams back in 1999. And for maybe folks that are not old enough to remember that, there's probably 20 other examples of teams who ran out 2, 3, 4 weapons. I mean, look at San Francisco. What do you call George Kittle? I mean, basically a wide receiver at tight end, and Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield. How can you create that situation for your quarterback? And the other thing is, too, people get hurt. And your fill-in player is Jalen Naylor right now if somebody gets hurt. Jordan Addison might be suspended for several games. Also, if you have concerns about Addison off the field going forward, do you want to give him $30 million? Because that's what you're going to owe him very soon. So I like the idea of Burden, Agbuka. I do not think that the Vikings will do it. I just need other people who are smart about football to tell me that I'm not nuts when I bring this up. And I saw Palazzolo. He had in his mock draft, he had Agbuka going to the Vikings. And I was like, there are dozens of us out there, literally dozens, saying the Vikings should draft a wide receiver.
It's an excellent argument. I originally thought a team like the Rams would be in the Agbuka market. He just fits well into what guys like Sean McVay and KOC and Kyle Shanahan want to do. And when you can get those guys, you outlined several excellent reasons why you should do it. You got to grab them. And it feels like there's good value in Agbuka and Burden this year at the wide receiver position at that pick. And so I think I always like to take things away when I do podcasts like this, especially with you, Matthew, because I really respect you. You gave me one of my first shots in this business, and I always learn stuff from you. And I think what I'm taking away is it's clear that the plan that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah put in place years ago has been just ticking along. Maybe the Kirk Cousins injury kind of put it off to the side, but it resulted in them getting a quarterback on time. Maybe the JJ McCarthy thing didn't end up going well, but it ended up in building a whole team around Sam Darnold on time. And now they're in a position where they don't have a ton of draft capital. The free agents should make an impact given they had so much cap space. And they'll be able to make a decision on whether to draft guys, which I think we'd advise them to draft a wide receiver, or to trade back in order to refill the draft guide coffers. The draft capital coffers. And so when all those multi-year decisions start coming together, I think it makes sense. And that's why I think we are not crazy, Matthew, because if we're starting to think that they're thinking this, then they definitely at least have considered it, right?
I promise you they have. And at least we know there's one guy that they respect inside that building, Keenan McCardle, who would be on our side of draft another wide receiver. So we can guarantee there's one person who agrees with us. Although at the owners' meetings, Kevin O'Connell kind of made fun of me for bringing this up to him about the wide receivers. But we'll see how it ends up playing out. The thing is that's not crazy is that there are a million different ways that this could go, and that makes it exciting. And just to address what you were talking about with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, you can talk about individual moves that worked or didn't work, or draft picks that worked or didn't work, and questions about, well, should they have done this instead of that? But the bigger picture on this, I think, is the most valuable part of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and every GM in the NFL, which is having a plan. What is your plan going to be? How do you go from point A to point B? I was pro tank when they got here. Take it all down, draft high. And, I still think that would have worked out fine, but they were not of that plan. That's not what their ownership wanted to do. So they devised competitive rebuild. How are we going to get to a rookie quarterback contract, spend in free agency, and build this roster to this point? And they've executed it really well. So when I look around the league and I go, there's a team that has Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston as their quarterbacks. What's your plan? Like, are you good? Or, there's no plan with the Giants. It's just save your butts. What's the plan in New Orleans? They don't have one. They just give Derek Carr a ton of money, and then he's got this shoulder. Like, what are you guys doing? So there's so many teams in the league that you can look at and go, I think they're lost in the woods. The Vikings are not one of them. You very craftily weaved in your promotion for SumerSports.com, which is where people can find a draft guide. Like I said, a bunch of very new statistics that you've never seen before. So It's SUMER, Sumer Sports. Go check it out. The Sumer Sports Show with you and Lindsay Rhodes, two people who have become my friends, and I appreciate that. So great to have you on again, Sam Bruchhaus, and we will absolutely do it again real soon, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Again, like the goal of the draft guide was number one, to bring something to market about college football. I love college football that isn't out there. And number two, make it free and make it available on mobile. So when the Vikings make a selection at 24, you can go on sumersports.com. You can screenshot it on your phone. You can throw it in the group chat and tell everyone, "Oh yeah, I knew they were going to do this. You know, this is a blue chip guy with all the blue on his profile." And so I encourage everyone to do this. But thank you as always for having me.
All right, and we'll talk to y'all again soon. Football. You want to say football?
Football.
Football.